The scratching came at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, desperate, frantic, clawing at wood like something dying. Sarah Mitchell froze at the kitchen table, her late husband's rifle suddenly heavy in her hands. Nothing should be out there. Nothing alive came to this God-forsaken cabin anymore. The temperature had dropped to 22 below zero. The blizzard had been howling for 3 hours. She was 15 miles from the nearest human being, and something was trying to get inside. Another scratch, then a sound that stopped her heart, a high-pitched whimper, almost human. Sarah's hand trembled on the doorknob. Every instinct screamed danger, but that sound, that desperate plea. She opened the door. A wolf pup stood on her grandmother's porch, ice-crusted in its gray fur, eyes wild with terror. It looked up at her, shivering violently. Then it did something impossible. It grabbed. Sarah Mitchell had stopped believing in miracles 3 years ago, the day they revoked her veterinary license. She'd stopped believing in justice 2 years ago, when her husband James died and everyone blamed her. She'd stopped believing in anything 6 months ago, when her grandmother Eleanor passed away alone in this cabin while Sarah worked her 3rd minimum-wage job, trying to survive. Now, at 32, she looked 50. Grief had carved lines into her face that no amount of sleep could erase. Her hands, once steady enough to perform delicate surgery on a grizzly bear's infected paw, now trembled from exhaustion and despair. She wore James's old firefighter jacket because she couldn't afford a new one, because it still smelled faintly like him, because letting go felt like dying all over again. The cabin she'd inherited was supposed to be her last resort. Instead, it felt like her tomb. She'd arrived that afternoon with one suitcase containing everything she owned, which wasn't much after the bank foreclosed on their home. The house was freezing. She'd set the thermostat to 55 degrees to save money she didn't have. Her Christmas Eve dinner had been half a can of soup eaten standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone hurt too much. Her phone showed 0 notifications, 0 missed calls, 0 messages. The world had moved on without her. 3 years ago, Sarah had been one of Wyoming's most respected wildlife veterinarians. She'd specialized in large predators, bears, wolves, mountain lions. Her work was published in journals. Rangers called her first for emergencies. She'd been building something that mattered. Then came the grizzly bear, caught in an illegal trap, dying. Protocol said, wait for the full team with tranquilizers. But the bear would have died waiting. Sarah went alone, freed it, saved its life. The rancher who'd set the trap reported her. Her supervisor called her reckless, emotional, unprofessional, all the words they use for women who trust their instincts over paperwork. They suspended her license pending review, then revoked it entirely. Her husband James had defended her decision publicly, told anyone who'd listened that she'd done the right thing. The fire department where he worked warned him about enabling dangerous behavior. 2 years ago, he died in a wildfire trying to save evidence from a burning building. Evidence that would have exposed illegal trapping operations run by his childhood friend, Derek Hartman. Sarah knew the truth. James had texted her that night. Going to help Derek. Don't wait up. The fire was supposed to be controlled, contained. It wasn't. The community blamed Sarah anyway. She'd taught him that rules didn't matter, they said. She'd made him reckless, they said. The medical bills from James's 3 days in ICU came to $340,000. The foreclosure notice came 18 months later. Grandmother Eleanor died alone while Sarah was working the night shift at a gas station, too proud to ask for help, too broken to offer it. Now, here she was, no license, no career, no husband, no home. Just this cabin, and $15,000 in property taxes she couldn't pay. The wolf pup was still pulling at her sleeve, eyes desperate. The wolf pup shouldn't exist. Gray wolves avoided humans with religious fervor, especially in winter, when hunger made them cautious of anything that might be a trap. Yet this pup, maybe 4 or 5 months old, severely underweight, with ribs visible beneath its matted fur, stood on her grandmother's porch like it had been invited. Sarah had seen enough wildlife in her career to know desperation when she faced it. The pup's eyes held the same look she'd seen in dying animals, that terrible awareness that time was running out. Ice crystals had frozen into its coat. Its paws were bleeding from traveling through deep snow. It had been walking for hours, maybe days, but it wasn't begging for food. It was begging for something else entirely. Sarah grabbed her emergency pack from the closet, the one she'd kept stocked out of habit even after losing her license. First aid kit, rope, flares, emergency blanket. She pulled on her heaviest boots and grabbed Eleanor's old headlamp. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 rescue calls taking over. The rational part of her brain was screaming. Going into the forest during a blizzard at midnight was suicidal. The temperature was dropping toward 30 below zero. The wind chill would kill her in under an hour without proper shelter. Her phone had no signal. The landline was down, ice on the lines. If she got lost, nobody would even know to look for her. She should call wildlife services on the emergency radio. They'd respond in 2, maybe 3 hours if they could get through the storm. Protocol existed for a reason, but the pup was staring at her with those intelligent yellow-green eyes, and Sarah heard her grandmother's voice in her head. Sometimes brave doesn't mean fearless, sweetheart. Sometimes it just means scared, but doing it anyway. Sarah looked at the note she'd started writing on the kitchen table, an old habit from her ranger days. Following injured wildlife signal, she wrote, then paused. She didn't know the coordinates yet. She didn't know if she'd come back. She signed it anyway and left it under the sugar bowl. At the door, she hesitated. Her hand rested on the frame, the same door frame her grandmother had touched the last time she'd left this house, heading to the hospital, never to return. The same door James had walked through on his last morning, kissing her goodbye, promising to be careful. Thresholds were dangerous in this house. People who crossed them didn't always come back. Sarah stepped into the blizzard. The pup moved immediately, with clear purpose. This wasn't the wandering of a lost animal. It knew exactly where it was going. The path led away from the marked trails, into deep woods where no human had walked in weeks. The snow came up to Sarah's knees, each step exhausting. Her face went numb within minutes, despite the scarf wrapped around it. The pup kept checking behind, making sure she followed. When Sarah struggled through a particularly deep drift, it slowed its pace. When she found easier footing, it moved faster. But who? Wild wolves didn't have that kind of contact with people, and captive-raised wolves weren't released in Wyoming. After 45 minutes of walking, her headlamp caught something odd. A fallen log with what looked like an old leather collar rotting in the snow. Sarah bent to examine it. The tag was barely readable, corroded by weather and time. Property of Eleanor Mitchell, Wolf Rehabilitation Program, 2018. Sarah's breath caught. Her grandmother had run a wolf rehabilitation program? That was impossible. It was completely illegal without federal permits. Eleanor had never mentioned it, never hinted at anything like that. But here was physical evidence. Eleanor's name stamped into leather. The pup nudged Sarah's leg urgently. No time to process this revelation now. She pocketed the collar and kept walking. The direction felt eerily familiar. Sarah had hiked these woods as a child, following Eleanor on what she'd thought were simple nature walks. But maybe they'd been something else entirely. Maybe Eleanor had been checking on animals Sarah never knew existed. The gray ghosts, Eleanor used to call them, pointing at shadows in the forest. Sarah had thought her grandmother was telling stories. Now she wondered if every story had been truth. The pup stopped at a clearing ahead, silhouetted against the snow. It turned back to Sarah one more time, whined urgently, then disappeared into the darkness. Sarah followed, her headlamp cutting through the blizzard. When the light found what waited in that clearing, she understood why a wolf pup had knocked on her door on Christmas Eve. And why she might not survive the night. The clearing had been modified by human hands. Rocks arranged in a semicircle created a windbreak against the elements. Remnants of old equipment boxes lay half buried in snow, rusted, forgotten, but unmistakably purposeful. Someone had built this as a monitoring site, perhaps decades ago. A waterproof case sat wedged between two stones, its contents likely field notes from researchers long gone. But Sarah's attention fixed on what lay in the center of that clearing. The alpha wolf was dying. He was massive, easily 140 pounds of muscle and fur, with a dark gray coat marked by a distinctive scar running over his left eye. That scar looked old, healed years ago, a badge of survival in a brutal world. He lay on his side, breathing in shallow, labored gasps. Around his neck, embedded deep into fur and flesh, was a metal snare, the kind that tightened with every movement, designed to slowly strangle whatever it caught. The wolf had stopped fighting. That was the most terrifying detail. Predators fought until the very end, unless they'd accepted death. His eyes, half closed, tracked Sarah's approach with dull awareness, but no aggression. He was too far gone for that. Sarah dropped to her knees in the snow, her professional training overriding everything else. She pulled out her headlamp and examined the injury from a safe distance. The snare had been there for at least 48 hours, maybe longer. The wire had cut through the outer layer of skin, causing significant swelling and infection. Blood matted the fur around the wound. Every breath the wolf took was an act of will. This was a death sentence. Even with a full veterinary team, proper sedation, and surgical facilities, the wolf's chances were maybe 50-50. Out here, in a blizzard, with no equipment and no license to practice medicine? Impossible. Sarah sat back on her heels, the weight of reality crushing down. She'd seen this before. The grizzly bear, 3 years ago, caught in that illegal trap. Same scenario. Dying animal, no time to wait for proper help, a choice between breaking rules and watching something innocent die. That choice had cost her everything. The pup appeared beside its father, whimpering softly. It licked the alpha's face, trying to rouse him. The big wolf's eyes opened slightly, focused on his offspring. Something passed between them. Recognition, love, goodbye. Then the alpha's gaze moved to Sarah. In those dark eyes, she saw no blame, no accusation, just exhaustion and a question. "Can you help?" Sarah heard her grandmother's voice again, clearer this time. "License doesn't make you a healer, Sarah. Heart does." But her husband's voice came too, weaker, from that hospital bed. "I should have followed protocol." You were right to break rules for that bear. But I should have been more careful. Two ghosts, two philosophies, tearing her apart. She pulled out her phone, knowing it was futile, no signal. The emergency radio was back at the cabin. Even if she could call wildlife services now, they'd need 2 hours minimum to arrive, assuming they could travel in this storm at all. The wolf didn't have 2 hours. He had maybe 1. Sarah examined her emergency kit. Multi-tool with wire cutters, but they were designed for thin camping wire, not industrial-strength snare cable.
Rope to create a restraint system. But restraining a wolf without sedation was asking to be mauled. First aid supplies meant for humans, not large predators. Everything about this was wrong. Everything about this violated protocol, common sense, and self-preservation. The alpha wolf coughed, a wet, terrible sound. Blood flecked his muzzle. Internal damage, Sarah realized. The snare wasn't just strangling him from outside. It had caused trauma to his throat and windpipe. Even if she removed the wire, he might die from internal injuries. She thought about her grandmother, who'd apparently run an illegal wolf rehabilitation program in these very woods. Eleanor had broken every rule, risked everything, and somehow gotten away with it for years. Why? For moments exactly like this one. For animals that deserved a chance even when the system said they didn't. Sarah reached for the multi-tool, her hands steadier than they'd been in years. Then she heard it, the distant roar of a snowmobile engine growing closer. The pup's entire demeanor changed. Its ears flattened against its skull, lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing small but sharp teeth. The sound it made was pure fear and hatred combined. The alpha tried to raise his head, survival instinct overriding shutdown. His body tensed, the snare tightening further. He was trying to protect his pup even while dying. Sarah's blood went cold. Whoever was coming, these wolves knew them, and they were terrified. The snowmobile burst into the clearing, headlight cutting through the blizzard like a searchlight. The driver killed the engine and dismounted slowly, a rifle slung across his back. When he removed his helmet, Sarah's world tilted sideways. Derek Hartman stood 10 feet away, looking at his trap, his wolves, and the woman whose life he'd destroyed. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, voice flat with shock. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sarah rose to her feet, placing herself between Derek and the wolves. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Saving your victim." Derek's hand moved toward his rifle. "That's my trap, my property. Snare traps are illegal in Wyoming. This is federal land. You're one to talk about breaking rules." The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats before Derek spoke again, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "You need to step away from those animals, Sarah. That alpha is dangerous. He's dying." "There's a difference." "Good. That's 28 down." Derek's voice carried a bitterness that shocked her. This wasn't the man she remembered from backyard barbecues with James. The man who'd told stories about his niece Emma. The man who'd seemed gentle, despite his rancher's calluses. Sarah's mind raced. 28? You've killed 28 wolves? 27. This one makes 28 when he's finished dying. Derek moved closer, and Sarah saw his face properly in her headlamp. He'd aged a decade since James's funeral. Deep lines carved around his mouth, his eyes hollow, with something darker than grief. "Been hunting them for 8 years, ever since they took Emma." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma Hartman, Derek's 8-year-old niece, had disappeared while hiking near Yellowstone. The case had dominated local news for months. Search parties, FBI involvement, national media attention. They'd found evidence of an animal attack, torn clothing, blood, wolf tracks everywhere. But they'd never found Emma's body. "Derek," Sarah said carefully, keeping her voice steady despite the rifle he carried, "wolves didn't take Emma. The investigation—" "The investigation concluded animal attack. I was there when they showed me the evidence." His hand clenched on the rifle strap. "Her jacket torn to pieces, her blood soaked into the ground, wolf tracks all over the scene. They said she'd been dragged away, probably eaten. Case closed." Sarah's veterinary training kicked in, the part of her brain that could assess situations clinically, even under pressure. That doesn't sound right. Wolves almost never attack humans, especially not children. In the entire recorded history of "Don't lecture me about wolves," Derek's shout echoed across the clearing, causing the pup to press closer to its father. "I know what they did. I saw the evidence. I held her torn jacket in my hands while her mother collapsed. You want to talk about protocol and statistics? Tell that to an 8-year-old girl who was ripped apart by animals you people protect." The rage in his voice was genuine, but beneath it, Sarah heard something else. A grief so profound it had curdled into poison. She recognized it because she'd felt it herself after James died. That need to blame something, anything, to make the senseless make sense. "So you've been trapping wolves illegally for 8 years, Sarah said, killing entire packs. Does that bring Emma back? It protects other kids from the same fate." Derek's jaw set stubbornly. "Rangers won't do it. Wildlife services won't do it. They're too busy protecting predators and ignoring victims. Someone has to take responsibility. By breaking the law? By becoming exactly what you're supposedly fighting against?" Derek's laugh was bitter. "That's rich coming from you. Saint Sarah Mitchell, who lost her license for breaking protocol, who encouraged my best friend to be just as reckless. How'd that work out for James?" The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. Sarah felt the familiar guilt rise in her throat, the voice that whispered she'd caused James's death, by example, by showing him that rules were negotiable. But another voice, quieter, reminded her of the truth she'd protected for 2 years. "You want to talk about James?" Sarah's voice dropped dangerously low. "Let's talk about the night he died." Derek went very still. James didn't die in a random wildfire. He died trying to save evidence from your property. Evidence that would have convicted you of illegal trapping and poaching. You called him that night, didn't you? Your old high school buddy. Begged him to make it disappear before the officials search. Sarah, don't you set a fire to destroy your records. A controlled burn that got out of control because it was July and dry and you were desperate. James went back to save evidence because you convinced him it would ruin your life if it came out. And he died in the smoke. Sarah's voice cracked but didn't break. I have his phone. His texts to you. His diary entries about how conflicted he felt betraying his principles to protect a friend. Derek's face had gone white. That's not... I didn't mean for... He died protecting your secrets, Derek. I stayed silent because James made me promise, don't tell them about Derek. Emma needs her uncle. So I let the whole community blame me. I let them say I'd taught him recklessness, when really, you'd taught him loyalty could be fatal. Sarah took a step forward. I lost everything to keep your secret. My career, My home, my reputation, all gone, because I honored my dying husband's request to protect the man who killed him." The clearing fell silent, except for the wind and the alpha wolf's labored breathing. Derek stood frozen, his face a mask of horror and realization. "I didn't know," he whispered finally. "Sarah, I swear to God I didn't know you took the blame. I thought they blamed you for the bear incident, that James's death was separate. I didn't realize." "You didn't ask. You let me become the villain because it was convenient." Derek's hands shook on his rifle. For a long moment, Sarah thought he might raise it, at her, at the wolves, at himself. Instead, he let it drop to hang loose from its strap. "You're right," he said, voice hollow, "about all of it. I've been killing innocent animals for 8 years because I couldn't face the truth about my own cowardice. James died because of me. You suffered because of me. And I'm still here, still destroying things, still too broken to stop." The pup whined urgently, drawing both humans' attention back to the alpha. The big wolf's breathing had grown more shallow, more labored. Minutes left, maybe less. Sarah made a decision. "Do you have wire cutters? Heavy-duty ones?" Derek blinked, confused by the sudden shift. "On my snowmobile, commercial grade. I use them to set and remove traps. Get them. And get over here. We're saving him." "What? Sarah, I can't. I'm the one who trapped him. He'll die while we argue about the past." Sarah's voice cut through Derek's protests. "You've killed 27 wolves because you thought they took Emma. You can't undo that, but you can save this one. You can do one good thing before you completely lose yourself." Derek stared at her, then at the dying wolf, then back at her. "Why would you let me help, after everything I've done to you?" Sarah thought about Ghost's eyes meeting hers without blame, just exhaustion and a question. She thought about the pup trusting a human despite every reason not to. She thought about her grandmother's words. "Grace isn't deserved. That's why it's grace. Because Ghost has more right to hate you than I do, and he's not wasting energy on it. He's fighting to live. Besides," she added with grim practicality, "I need your wire cutters. And you need to do this." Derek nodded slowly, like a man waking from a nightmare. He walked to his snowmobile and returned with professional-grade cutting tools, the kind used for heavy industrial wire. His hands still shook as he handed them over. "Tell me what to do," he said quietly. Sarah knelt beside the alpha, her professional training taking over. "Hold his head. Talk to him. Your voice is going to scare him, but your hands need to be steady. I'll work the snare. He'll bite me. Maybe. But his son is watching. Animals understand when you're trying to help, usually." She didn't mention the times they didn't understand, the scars she carried from attempted rescues gone wrong. Derek positioned himself at the wolf's head, his movements surprisingly gentle for a man who'd spent 8 years killing them. He started talking in a low, steady voice, the same tone Sarah remembered him using with horses at his ranch, a lifetime ago, when everything was different. "Easy, boy. Easy now. We're trying to help. I know you don't believe that. I wouldn't either. But Sarah here, she's the best there is. If anyone can save you, it's her, so just hold on a little longer." Sarah examined the snare mechanism, her trained eye identifying the locking point.
The wire had twisted upon itself, creating a knot that had embedded into flesh. She'd need to cut in two places, one to release tension, another to free the wire completely. Cut wrong, and the wolf would bleed out before they could apply pressure. "On 3, Sarah said, positioning the cutters. "Hold him steady. This is going to hurt, and he's going to react." She counted down. On 3, she cut. The wire snapped with a metallic ping. The alpha jerked violently, a sound between a yelp and a growl erupting from his throat. Derek held firm, murmuring steady reassurances. Sarah immediately applied pressure to the wound with gauze from her first aid kit, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Blood flowed, not the arterial spray she'd feared, but steady enough to be concerning. She worked quickly, applying antiseptic and pressure bandages while the alpha panted beneath her hands. The pup pressed close, licking its father's face, offering what comfort it could. Slowly, the alpha's breathing began to even out. Not strong, not healthy, but better. Alive. Sarah sat back on her heels, her hands covered in blood and antiseptic. Derek remained at the wolf's head, still talking softly, his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. "He's stable," Sarah said finally, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. "But he needs more care than I can give here." Proper antibiotics, intravenous fluids, surgery to repair the internal damage. Hours of care, not minutes. Derek pulled out a satellite phone, better than Sarah's dead cell. "I'll make the call." "They'll arrest you. Active warrants for illegal trapping." "I know." Derek's voice was steady now, almost peaceful. "It's time I faced what I've done." He dialed Wildlife Services and identified himself. Sarah watched as he confessed to everything. 8 years of systematic wolf killing, illegal traps scattered across federal land, 27 confirmed kills. He gave coordinates, requested emergency veterinary assistance, and offered full cooperation. Then he said something that surprised Sarah. "I'm here with Sarah Mitchell." Her license was revoked, but she just saved this wolf's life. "I'm requesting you reinstate her temporarily for emergency treatment authorization." The dispatcher hesitated. Derek pressed. "If protocol is more important than saving an innocent animal, you're complicit in killing. Then the protocol is the problem." Sarah almost smiled. Those were her words, thrown back at the system that had broken her. The supervisor came on the line. Negotiation followed, tense, pragmatic, ultimately successful. A team would arrive in 90 minutes. Derek would remain on scene. Sarah could assist, but not treat independently. When the call ended, Derek looked at Sarah with something like hope in his eyes. "I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can start making it right." Sarah looked at Ghost, at the pup, at this broken man who'd destroyed so much and was finally facing the truth. "Maybe," she said quietly. "We'll see." 90 minutes in sub-zero temperatures felt like an eternity. Sarah and Derek worked in tense silence, monitoring Ghost's vital signs, keeping the pup calm, rationing body heat through emergency blankets. The blizzard had lessened to occasional gusts, but the cold remained brutal enough to kill exposed skin in minutes. Derek built a small fire, using deadwood and supplies from his snowmobile. Breaking another regulation,
But at this point, one more violation hardly mattered. The flames provided minimal warmth, but crucial morale. The pup curled close to the fire, exhausted from days of stress and malnutrition. Ghost remained still, conserving energy, his breathing steadier but far from normal. Sarah checked her watch obsessively. 60 minutes left. 45. 30. Every minute that passed felt like a gamble. Would Ghost hold on? Or was she watching another life slip away despite her best efforts? Derek broke the silence first. "I need to tell you something about Emma." Sarah looked up from checking Ghost's pulse. "Derek, you don't have to." "I do, because you deserve the truth, the whole truth." He stared into the fire, his face haggard. "Emma wasn't taken by wolves." The words hung in the frozen air like an accusation. "What?" Sarah's voice came out sharper than intended. "Emma was found 6 years ago, 2 years after she disappeared." Derek's hands clenched into fists. "Alive, in Montana, held by human traffickers." Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her. "What are you talking about?" The case was closed as animal attack. The evidence was planted. Derek's voice cracked. By a sheriff's deputy named Tom Brennan. He was on the trafficking ring's payroll. When Emma went missing, he manipulated the crime scene to make it look like wolves attacked her, planted her torn jacket, added wolf tracks, made sure everyone looked at animals instead of humans. My God. Sarah's professional composure shattered. "Derek, if Emma's alive, why have you been killing wolves for 8 years?" "Because I couldn't face the truth." The words exploded out of him. Emma testified at the trial. She told everyone what really happened. The wolves didn't hurt her, they found her. The pack tracked the kidnapper's van after they took her. When Emma escaped 2 years later and was running through the woods, bleeding from a fall, terrified, the wolves led search dogs to her location. They saved her life. Sarah couldn't breathe. 27 innocent wolves, slaughtered for a crime they not only didn't commit, but had actually helped solve. "Emma knows this," Sarah said slowly, understanding dawning. "She knows you've been killing the animals that saved her." "She won't see me." Derek's voice broke completely. "She's 16 now, living with foster parents. Beautiful, smart, strong, everything I hoped she'd be. But she won't see me because her uncle became the monster she was running from. When she heard I'd been hunting wolves all these years, she said I was worse than the men who took her. At least they were honest about being evil." The cruelty of it was staggering. Derek had destroyed himself over a lie, killed innocent creatures who'd been heroes, and lost the very person he'd claimed to be avenging. "Why didn't you stop?" Sarah asked, "once you knew the truth?" "I tried." Derek looked at his hands as if seeing blood that wouldn't wash off. "For about 6 months after the trial, I stopped setting traps." But the guilt was worse than the hate. Hate gave me purpose. Guilt just gave me nightmares. So I convinced myself the trial was wrong, that Emma was confused, that the wolves were still dangerous. Easier to keep killing than to face what I'd become. Sarah thought about her own guilt, the years she'd spent believing James's death was her fault, the way grief had twisted into self-destruction. She understood the psychology, even as it horrified her. "James knew," Derek continued, "about Emma being alive, about the wolves being innocent. He tried to tell me, tried to get me to stop. That night he died, the fire I set,
I wasn't just destroying trapping evidence. I was destroying Emma's letters to me. Letters where she begged me to stop hunting wolves.
James went back to save those letters because he thought if I read them again, really read them, I might finally listen. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. James hadn't died protecting Derek's crimes. He'd died trying to save Derek's soul. He never told you because he knew you'd blame yourself, Derek said quietly, just like you blamed yourself for the bear incident. James's last words to me in the hospital were, "Don't let Sarah know. She'll think this is her fault. It's mine for not being brave enough to burn them myself." Sarah felt tears freeze on her cheeks. All these years, she'd thought James had been reckless because of her example. But he'd been trying to save a friend from his own darkness. He'd been the bravest person she'd ever known, and she'd never understood why. "I let you take the blame," Derek said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I watched you lose everything, career, home, reputation, and I said nothing. Because if people knew the truth about me, they'd know I was the one who made him reckless. I was the one who killed him." The pup suddenly raised its head, ears perked. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors cut through the night. "They're here," Sarah said, pulling herself back to the present crisis. "Derek, when they land, you're going to be arrested." "I know. You'll face years in prison. Federal charges for the wolves, probably state charges for the fire. You'll lose everything." "I already lost everything that mattered." Derek looked at the pup, then at Ghost. "But maybe I can finally do one thing right." "Tell them the truth about Tom Brennan, about the planted evidence, about how the system failed Emma twice, once by letting her be taken, and again by blaming innocent animals." The helicopter descended into the clearing, its downdraft scattering snow in blinding clouds. A team emerged: veterinarian, 2 wildlife officers, paramedic. They moved with professional efficiency, immediately focusing on Ghost. The veterinarian, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Chen, examined Ghost quickly. "You saved his life. Another hour and the infection would have been systemic." Sarah felt a weight lift fractionally from her chest. "He needs surgery. Internal damage from the snare. We'll airlift him to Jackson Hole. Full treatment. Best facility in the region." Dr. Chen looked at Sarah with recognition. "You're Sarah Mitchell. I read your paper on grizzly rehabilitation. Brilliant work." "Thank you," Sarah said automatically, though the praise felt hollow after years of disgrace. One of the wildlife officers approached Derek. "Derek Hartman? That's me." "You're under arrest for illegal trapping, poaching of protected species, and tampering with federal lands. You have the right to remain—" "I know my rights," Derek interrupted gently. "I waive them. I want to make a full confession. Everything. 8 years of systematic wolf killing. Tom Brennan's involvement. The Emma Hartman case evidence tampering. All of it." The officer paused, surprised by the complete cooperation. "That's extensive. I'm done running from what I've done." As they loaded Ghost onto a stretcher for helicopter transport, the pup became agitated, trying to follow. Sarah knelt beside it, speaking softly. "Your father's going to be okay, but you can't go with him right now." The pup whined, desperate and heartbroken. "I'll take care of you," Sarah promised, surprising herself, "until he's better.
until you can be together again."
The paramedic examined the pup, finding the internal injuries Sarah had suspected. "This one needs treatment too. Broken rib, internal bruising." "Who kicked a wolf pup?" Everyone looked at Derek. "I did," he said flatly. 3 days ago. He was trying to free his father from my trap. I kicked him away. Hard. When he came back, I kicked him again." The officers' hands moved toward their weapons. The violence of the admission, kicking a pup, trying to save its parent, crossed a line even hardened professionals found difficult to stomach. "He came to my grandmother's house for help even after you hurt him," Sarah said, her voice cold. "He chose trust over fear. He's better than any of us." Dr. Chen's expression hardened. "We'll treat the pup too. Both wolves will recover fully. No thanks to you, Mr. Hartman." Derek didn't defend himself. "Add animal cruelty to the charges. I won't contest any of it." As they prepared to load Derek into the helicopter for transport to the police station, he turned to Sarah one last time. "I can never make this right, but thank you for trying to save me anyway." Sarah didn't respond. She wasn't sure she had saved him. She wasn't sure he deserved saving. But she'd saved Ghost and the pup, and that was enough. The helicopter lifted off, rotors churning snow into white chaos. Sarah stood alone in the clearing, holding the injured pup against her chest, watching the lights disappear into the pre-dawn darkness. It was Christmas morning. She'd saved 2 lives and watched a man confess to destroying 27 others. She'd learned the truth about James's death and discovered her grandmother's secret legacy. She looked down at the pup, who gazed up at her with those intelligent eyes. "I guess we're family now," she whispered. The pup licked her chin gently, and for the first time in 2 years, Sarah Mitchell smiled. The call came at 11 in the morning on Christmas Day. Sarah had finally fallen asleep on the couch with a pup curled against her chest, when the phone's ring jolted her awake. Her body ached from the night's exertion, and her hands still bore traces of Ghost's blood despite repeated washing. "Miss Mitchell, this is Dr. Chen from Jackson Hole Wildlife Hospital." Sarah's heart stopped. She sat up carefully, trying not to disturb the pup. "Is Ghost?" The surgery was more complicated than anticipated. Dr. Chen's professional tone gave nothing away. "We found extensive internal injuries beyond the snare damage. The helicopter crash during transport caused additional trauma, collapsed lung, lacerated liver. We've been in surgery for 6 hours." Sarah couldn't breathe. She'd sent Ghost on that helicopter. Her decision. If he died, she'd killed him trying to save him. The cruelest irony imaginable. "He didn't make it, did he?" The words came out flat, emotionless. Sarah had no tears left. "Actually, he's alive, stable. The prognosis is good with proper recovery time." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Thank God. Thank God." "But there's something else you need to know." Dr. Chen paused. "During surgery, we found old scar tissue and a healed fracture pattern consistent with vehicle collision. This wolf has been treated by professionals before. We also found a microchip." Sarah's breath caught. "A microchip? Standard practice for rehabilitation programs. The chip shows this wolf was originally rescued from an illegal breeding facility in Montana 5 years ago. The rescuer's name on the registration is Eleanor Mitchell, Sarah's grandmother, of course." The secret rehabilitation program hadn't just been about helping injured wild wolves. Eleanor had been actively freeing captive animals from criminal operations. Breaking laws, making enemies, saving lives nobody else cared about. "There's more," Dr. Chen continued. "I pulled records from the original rescue. This wolf, your grandmother named him Ghost, wasn't alone in that facility. There was a female with him, his mate. She didn't survive the rescue attempt. Ghost was the only one Eleanor could save." The tragedy of it settled over Sarah like snow. Ghost had lost his mate trying to escape human captivity, then spent 5 years rebuilding his life, forming a new pack, having offspring, only to be trapped again by a man whose own grief had poisoned him into becoming what he'd claimed to fight against. "Miss Mitchell, I need to ask you something." Dr. Chen's voice shifted, becoming less clinical. "Your grandmother's rehabilitation work was technically illegal, but it was also extraordinarily effective. She saved dozens of animals from breeding facilities, puppy mills, trophy hunting operations, made powerful enemies doing it. Did she ever mention someone named Tom Brennan?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "The sheriff's deputy? Derek just told me about him, the one who planted evidence in Emma Hartman's disappearance. Eleanor's journals list him as someone who threatened her repeatedly, told her to stop interfering with legitimate business operations. I'm sending copies to the FBI. I think Tom Brennan might have had multiple reasons to frame wolves for Emma's disappearance. Discrediting wolf conservation efforts would have protected his criminal enterprises and destroyed Eleanor's credibility. The conspiracy went deeper than Sarah had imagined. Emma's kidnapping, the planted evidence, Derek's 8-year hunting campaign, even James's death. All connected threads in a web of corruption that had destroyed multiple lives. "One more thing," Dr. Chen said. "We need to discuss the pup's care. He has internal injuries that require monitoring, but he's not critical. He could stay here for treatment, or what? Or you could take him home. Monitor him yourself. You have the training, even without an active license. And honestly, separating him from his father right now would cause severe psychological trauma. They need each other." Sarah looked at the pup sleeping against her, this small creature who'd trusted a human despite having every reason not to. "How long until Ghost can be released?" "Minimum 2 weeks, possibly 4. He'll need controlled rehabilitation before return to the wilds." "I'll take the pup. Monitor him myself. And when Ghost is ready, bring him to my grandmother's property. I'll set up proper rehabilitation facilities." The decision came easily, like stepping into a role she'd been preparing for without knowing it. "Are you sure? That's a significant commitment. Federal oversight, regular inspections, strict protocol?" "I'm sure." Sarah stroked the pup's head gently. "My grandmother started something important here. It's time I finished it." After hanging up, Sarah sat in the quiet cabin, processing everything that had unraveled in 12 hours. She'd gone from alone and broken to responsible for 2 wolves' lives, from blamed and disgraced to potentially vindicated, from believing she'd caused James's death to understanding he'd died trying to save someone else's soul. The pup stirred, looking up at her with those intelligent eyes. Sarah smiled, despite her exhaustion. "Your name's Ash," she told him, "because you rose from the ashes of everything broken, and because you're going to help me do the same." Ash, no longer just the pup, licked her hand gently,
sealing the bond. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Emma Hartman. Wildlife Services gave me your contact. I heard what you did for Ghost. Can we talk?" Sarah stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. Emma, the girl at the center of this tragedy, the one Derek had destroyed himself trying to avenge, the one who'd been saved by the very creatures he'd spent 8 years killing. Sarah typed, "Yes, please, come whenever you're ready." The response came immediately. "Tomorrow. I have things you need to know about my uncle, about the wolves, about everything." Emma Hartman arrived at Eleanor's cabin the next afternoon, driven by her foster mother, who waited tactfully in the car. At 16, Emma carried herself with a careful composure that spoke of trauma processed through years of therapy. She had blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that looked older than her face, the eyes of someone who'd seen too much, too young. Ash greeted her at the door with cautious curiosity. Emma knelt immediately, offering her hand for him to sniff. "You're Ghost's son," she said softly. "You have his eyes." "You know Ghost?" Sarah asked, surprised. "He saved my life 8 years ago." Emma stood, brushing snow from her knees. "Can we talk inside? There's a lot you don't know." Over coffee that Emma doctored with excessive sugar like the teenager she was, she told Sarah the complete story, the version Derek couldn't face, the truth that had been buried under lies and grief. "I was 8 when they took me," Emma began, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. 3 men, in a van. They grabbed me off the trail while my mom was setting up our picnic. Professional, fast. I didn't even have time to scream. Sarah listened, her chest tight with vicarious horror. "They drove me to an abandoned facility in the mountains. Turns out it was one of the breeding operations your grandmother was shutting down. They were using it as a temporary holding location before moving kids across state lines. There were 2 other children there already." "God, Emma, I'm so sorry." "The facility still had animals in it. Wolves, mostly, in cages." Ghost was there with his mates. They were both injured from failed escape attempts. The men didn't care. They were just going to leave them to die once they cleared out. Emma took a shaky breath. "I was locked in a room for 2 months. The other kids were moved before me. I thought I was going to die there. But one night I heard wolves outside, not howling, working, digging, scratching at the building's foundation. Ghost's pack," Sarah said, understanding. "He'd escaped somehow, but his mate was still trapped inside. He'd brought his whole pack to free her. They were trying to break through the walls. The men heard the noise and ran, thought it was police or FBI. Just abandoned everything and fled." Emma's eyes grew distant with memory. "I was left locked in that room. The wolves broke through the exterior wall into where the cages were, but they couldn't reach me. Ghost's mate was already dead. Starvation, injuries, I don't know. I heard Ghost's howl when he found her. It was the saddest sound I'd ever heard. Sarah thought of Ghost lying in that snare, ready to die, and understood the layers of trauma that wolf carried. But Ghost didn't leave," Emma continued. "He could have run, grieved, disappeared into the forest. Instead, he started working on the interior wall, the one between the cage room and where I was trapped. It took him hours. He was bleeding from broken claws, exhausted, but he kept digging." "He heard you," Sarah said softly. "He heard me crying. And somehow he decided I was worth saving, even though his mate was dead and humans had caused all his suffering." Emma's voice cracked. "He broke through.
I was terrified, this massive wolf covered in blood coming through the wall, but he just stood there, waiting, like he knew I needed to choose to trust him. And you did. I did. I followed him out. The pack was waiting outside. They surrounded me, not threatening, protective. Then they walked me through the forest, 15 miles to the highway. Every time I fell, they'd stop and wait. When I was too tired to walk, they'd circle me and rest until I could move again. Sarah's throat tightened. This was the pack Derek had been systematically destroying. Heroes who'd saved a child's life, hunted as monsters. When we reached the highway, Ghost stayed with me until a trucker stopped. The moment the truck pulled over, the wolves melted into the forest, like they knew their job was done. Emma wiped her eyes. The trucker called police. I told them everything, about the men, the facility, the wolves who saved me. They found my torn jacket and blood at the original kidnapping site. Sheriff's Deputy Tom Brennan was first on scene. He planted the wolf evidence, Sarah said. Worse than that, he was part of the trafficking ring. He's the one who told them which kids to target, which trails were least monitored. When I testified about the facility, about the breeding operation, about how wolves saved me, Brennan realized I could connect him to everything. So he made sure my testimony focused on the trafficking and buried the parts about the wolves. Why? Because your grandmother's investigation into the breeding facility was getting close to exposing his involvement. If people believed wolves were heroes who saved me, Eleanor's work would get more attention and funding. But if wolves were the villains who supposedly killed me, her program would be discredited and shut down. The cynicism of it was breathtaking. Brennan had weaponized a child's trauma to protect his criminal enterprise and destroy a woman who threatened it. I told my Uncle Derek the truth, Emma said, her voice hardening. Showed him court transcripts, medical records, everything proving wolves saved me. He couldn't accept it, said the evidence was wrong, that I was confused by trauma, that the wolves must have been involved somehow. Grief does terrible things to logic, Sarah offered. It wasn't just grief. Emma's composure cracked slightly. It was easier. Easier to hate wolves than to hate Brennan, who was his friend. Easier to hunt animals than to face that the system failed me. Easier to kill than to heal. Sarah understood that truth intimately. She'd spent 2 years believing she'd killed James through bad example, rather than facing the more complex reality of his sacrifice and Derek's manipulation.
Uncle Derek killed Ghost's entire pack, Emma continued, her voice breaking. The wolves who saved my life. He hunted them one by one. Ghost is the last survivor, the only one left of the family who chose mercy when they could have chosen revenge.
Emma, I'm so sorry for everything you've been through, for what Derek did, for all of it.
I don't want apologies. I want you to know why I'm here.
Emma straightened, teenage fragility replaced by steel determination.
Your grandmother saved Ghost. Ghost saved me. You saved Ghost again. Now I want to help you finish what Eleanor started.
What do you mean?
I'm 16. 2 more years until I'm 18 and can make my own legal decisions. But I can volunteer. I can testify. I can be a voice for the wolves nobody listens to.
Emma pulled papers from her bag. I've been documenting every breeding facility, every illegal operation I can find. network of activists online, sharing information. Your grandmother was part of it before she died. I want Eleanor's Wolf Haven to be more than rehabilitation. I want it to be a base for shutting down the operations that create victims in the first place. Sarah looked at the papers, addresses, names, operations spanning multiple states. Dangerous information. The kind that got people threatened, hurt, killed. Emma, this is vigilante work. It's dangerous. What you're proposing is exactly what your grandmother died doing, Emma interrupted. Eleanor had a heart attack, yes, but it happened right after Tom Brennan confronted her here, told her to stop interfering or face consequences. The stress killed her. I have phone records, security footage from town, showing Brennan's truck at her property. He might not have pulled a trigger, but he killed her just the same. Sarah felt the world tilt again. Her grandmother hadn't just died alone. She'd died under threat, fighting until her last breath. "I can't ask you to take this risk," Sarah said carefully. "You're 16. You've been through enough." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Emma's eyes blazed with purpose. "Ghost saved me when he'd lost everything. Your grandmother saved him when no one else cared. You saved both of them when you had nothing left to give. I'm not a victim anymore, Sarah. I'm a survivor who owes a debt. Let me help you pay it forward." Sarah looked at Ash, sleeping peacefully on the couch. She thought about Ghost recovering in a hospital, about Derek in prison, about James dying to save letters he'd hoped would redeem a friend. She thought about Eleanor, fighting alone against corruption until it killed her. "Okay," Sarah said finally, "but we do this smart. Legal wherever possible, protected, documented, safe." Emma smiled, the first real smile Sarah had seen from her. Eleanor used to say, "Sometimes the bravest thing is asking for help." We're not alone anymore. There's a whole network ready to support this. Then let's finish what my grandmother started. Emma extended her hand. Sarah shook it. Two survivors, separated by 16 years and connected by wolves, sealing a partnership that would honor the dead and protect the living. Outside, Ash lifted his head and howled softly. A sound of acknowledgement, of belonging, of pack. Sarah and Emma looked at each other and smiled. The real work was just beginning. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Eleanor's Wolf Haven looked nothing like the isolated cabin Sarah had stumbled into on the worst night of her life. The property had been transformed into a legitimate rehabilitation center, with proper facilities, licensed staff, and federal oversight. A new wing housed medical equipment and recovery spaces. Outdoor enclosures allowed wolves to transition gradually from captivity to freedom. Solar panels provided power. A sign at the entrance read, "Eleanor Mitchell Memorial Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where second chances begin." Sarah stood on the porch where a wolf pup had once scratched desperately, watching the sun set over snow-covered mountains. She wore her grandmother's old collar as a bracelet, a tangible reminder of legacy and purpose. At 33, she looked younger than she had a year ago, the lines of grief softened by meaning, the exhaustion of despair replaced by the exhaustion of fulfilling work. Ash, now a magnificent yearling wolf, lounged nearby. Fully healed and technically ready for release, he'd chosen to stay. He served as an ambassador, teaching newly rescued wolves that humans could be trusted. His presence calmed frightened animals in a way no human could match. Inside, the haven bustled with activity. Emma, now 17 and applying to wildlife biology programs, helped prepare the evening meal for 12 wolves currently in rehabilitation. 3 staff members, all people who'd lost careers to rule-breaking, similar to Sarah's, coordinated care schedules and medical treatments. A local veterinarian volunteer checked on a wolf recovering from trap injuries. The doorbell rang. Sarah opened it to find Derek Hartman standing on the porch, thinner than she remembered, eyes clear in a way they hadn't been for years. He'd been released from prison 3 months ago after serving 2 years of a reduced sentence for cooperation that had brought down Tom Brennan's entire criminal network. "Hi, Sarah," he said quietly. "Emma invited me. Said I should be here tonight." Sarah stepped aside wordlessly, letting him enter. Their relationship existed in a complicated space between forgiveness and understanding, between justice and mercy. She didn't forgive him, perhaps never would, but she'd learned that some people's redemption wasn't hers to grant or deny. Emma appeared from the kitchen, hesitant hope on her face. "Uncle Derek, you came." "You asked me to." Derek's voice cracked slightly. "Thank you for asking." The embrace between them was tentative, awkward, but real. Sarah looked away, giving them privacy for a moment that belonged to them alone. More guests arrived. Dr. Chen from Jackson Hole Hospital, bringing updates on released wolves thriving in the wild. The local wildlife officials who'd supported Sarah's licensing restoration. A journalist documenting the haven's first-year success. Foster families and volunteers who'd made the transformation possible. At 7 p.m., they gathered in the main room for the ceremony Sarah had organized. A plaque was unveiled on the wall, bronze, permanent, honoring Eleanor Mitchell's secret legacy. But before the formal dedication, Sarah asked Emma to speak. Emma stood before the gathered crowd, holding a folder of papers. "A year ago, my Uncle Derek was arrested for killing 27 wolves. He believed they'd murdered me. The truth is, they saved my life." But Uncle Derek couldn't accept that truth, because accepting it meant facing how much pain he'd caused while grieving. Derek, sitting in the back, wiped his eyes silently. Sarah Mitchell lost everything, her career, her husband, her home, because she chose to save a dying bear instead of following protocol. The system punished her for having compassion. Emma's voice strengthened. "My grandmother Eleanor was threatened and harassed for rescuing animals from criminal operations. The stress literally killed her. And Ghost?" She gestured toward the window where a large shape moved in the darkness. "Lost his mate, his pack, and nearly his life. All because humans valued rules and revenge over mercy and truth." Sarah felt her throat tighten, knowing what Emma was building toward. "But here's what happened next," Emma continued. "Ghost's son trusted a stranger. Sarah saved them both despite having nothing left to give. Uncle Derek confessed instead of hiding. Tom Brennan and his entire trafficking network are in prison. 43 wildlife professionals who lost licenses for breaking protocol to save lives have been reinstated. And this haven has rehabilitated 127 wolves in 1 year. Applause rippled through the room. "We're here tonight because Eleanor Mitchell believed something radical. That sometimes the rules protecting us are actually killing what's good. That grace isn't about deserving, it's about choosing. That broken people and broken animals can heal each other if we're brave enough to trust. Emma pulled out a final paper. Uncle Derek wrote this letter from prison. He asked me to read it tonight. I'm going to honor that request. She read Derek's words, raw, honest, devastating. I killed 27 innocent creatures because I couldn't face my own failures. I destroyed my best friend's widow because protecting my secrets was easier than facing my guilt. I lost 8 years with my niece because grief was more comfortable than healing. Sarah Mitchell had every right to destroy me. Instead, she showed me grace I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. Emma had every right to hate me. Instead, she chose to believe I could still become someone worth knowing. The wolves I hunted were better than me in every way. They chose survival over revenge, trust over fear, mercy over justice. I'm here tonight to say I was wrong about everything. And I'm grateful to spend whatever time I have left trying to be right. The room fell silent except for the sound of people crying softly. Emma folded the letter. Uncle Derek will volunteer here starting next week, teaching people about the wolves he hunted, making sure no one else's grief becomes someone else's death sentence. Sarah stood and joined Emma at the front. Eleanor used to say that loneliness is a choice after a while, but so is connection. The wolves taught me that. Ghost taught me that. He came back to Eleanor's territory year after year, even after she died, because loyalty doesn't die with the person you're loyal to. As if on cue, Ash stood and walked to the window, looking out. Sarah followed his gaze and saw Ghost standing at the edge of the property, barely visible in the darkness. Behind him, 7 other wolves, his new pack, formed from Haven releases. Sarah opened the door. The cold rushed in, but so did clarity. Ghost didn't approach. He didn't need to. He stood in the snow, acknowledging Sarah's presence across the distance. Then he did something extraordinary. He sat down. The entire pack followed his lead, sitting in formation, watching the warm house with its lights and people and purpose. "They're paying respects," Dr. Chen whispered. "I've never seen wild wolves do this." "They're not just wild anymore," Sarah said softly. "And we're not just human. We're something in between. We're pack." Ghost stood, turned, and led his family back into the darkness. But before disappearing, he looked back once, amber eyes catching the light, holding Sarah's gaze. A promise, a thank you, a goodbye that wasn't final. Sarah closed the door and turned to the room full of people who'd helped build something beautiful from grief's ruins. Emma stood beside Derek, tentative but healing. Staff members who'd been broken by systems found purpose in breaking those systems down. Wolves who'd been victims became ambassadors for change. "My grandmother left me this cabin thinking it was just a house," Sarah said. "But it was never about the building. It was about what happens when you answer the door when something desperate asks for help. When you choose trust over fear. When you let the broken save each other." She raised her glass. To Eleanor, to Ghost, to second chances, to every soul brave enough to scratch at the door, and every soul brave enough to open it. "To pack," Emma added. "To pack," everyone echoed. Outside, distant howling rose into the night, Ghost's pack singing to the moon, wild and free and alive. Inside,
Humans who'd found each other in darkness raised their voices in response. Not howling, but laughing, crying, healing.
Sarah looked at the plaque honoring Eleanor and silently added her own words. "You were right, Grandma. The wolves taught me, and I'm not alone anymore." Ash pressed against her leg, warm and solid and loyal. Sarah smiled and whispered, "Merry Christmas." The winter that had nearly killed her had finally ended. Spring was coming, and she was ready. Sometimes life strips everything away. Career, loved ones, the home you built, the person you thought you were. You wake up one morning and realize you're living in the ruins of dreams that died years ago, carrying guilt for choices that seemed right at the time, wondering if redemption is even possible anymore. But here's what Sarah Mitchell learned on the coldest night of her year. Grace doesn't wait until you deserve it, and second chances often come disguised as the very things that terrify you most. When that wolf pup scratched at her door, Sarah had every reason to stay safe inside her grief. Instead, she chose trust over fear, action over protocol, connection over isolation. She discovered what Eleanor knew all along, that broken souls heal each other when we're brave enough to answer the door. The rules that once defined us sometimes need breaking. The pain we've carried doesn't have to be our ending. And it's never too late to become who we were meant to be, before life convinced us otherwise. What door in your life needs opening? What broken thing are you afraid to trust? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.